You won't believe what happened the day I walked outside and realized half of my lakefront, property I had paid for, maintained, and cherished, had suddenly been assigned to someone else without my consent. And not just anyone, but the cousin of the HOA president, the one everyone in the neighborhood secretly refers to as Karen. This is the story of how an entitled HOA tried to rewrite property boundaries, how a power-hungry president abused her authority, and how I responded with a single move, a fence, so shocking that neighbors are still talking about it months later. And trust me, by the time the story ends, you're going to understand exactly why people say, never mess with someone who knows their rights. Because once you push a person far enough, once you take what they've earned, and once you cross the line between authority and tyranny, that's when you get consequences nobody forgets. The whole issue started on a calm Saturday morning. I usually spent weekends working on my small dock, cleaning the kayaks, or just sitting on the bench overlooking the lake. That lakefront was my peace, my stress relief, my pride, my reason for buying the house in the first place. So when I woke up, brushed my teeth, grabbed my coffee, and headed to the backyard, I expected everything to be exactly the same as always. Except it wasn't. Because when I stepped outside, I saw three men I'd never met before hammering wooden stakes into my lawn. Not just anywhere, directly along the shoreline. My shoreline. My lakefront. I froze, confused, my coffee nearly falling out of my hand. At first, I thought they were surveyors sent by the city, maybe checking drainage or setting up for some utility project. So I approached politely, trying to make sense of it. But the moment I got close, one of the men waved me off and said, "We've been instructed not to stop. The HOA president gave his permission." Those words hit me like ice water. I didn't understand. Permission for what? And why was my land being marked? I asked them again to explain, and the oldest of the group finally sighed and said, "We're measuring out the lakefront for the new property boundaries." I remember blinking slowly, feeling that quiet burn behind your eyes when confusion starts turning to anger. "New property boundaries?" I repeated. "What new boundaries?" The man shrugged. "The HOA president said the lakefront area is common property now, and she's assigned the optional use section to her cousin who's moving into the neighborhood." I swear, for a second, I forgot how to breathe. My lakefront, my deeded, surveyed, paid-for lakefront, was being handed out like a party favor to her cousin, without a meeting, without a vote, without so much as a conversation. As the men continued hammering stakes, I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I walked straight inside, grabbed my documents, the original property plat, the deed, the map showing the lake boundaries, and marched toward the HOA office, which was just a short walk down the street. When I got there, I saw her, Karen. Blonde hair stiff with hairspray, sunglasses too big for her face, a clipboard tucked under one arm like it was a badge of honor. And of course, she was smiling. One of those smiles that hides disrespect under fake politeness. She greeted me like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just authorized strangers to chop up my land. I wasted no time. I slammed the folder onto the desk and said, "You need to explain what you think you're doing." She didn't even flinch. She just flipped her hair, raised her chin, and said, "We've updated the community regulations. We're reallocating extra lakefront sections to new residents who need it." New residents who need it. Her cousin, the one she'd bragged about at the last meeting, saying she couldn't wait for him to have the best spot in the neighborhood. I showed her the deed, the legal plat, the survey showing the exact measurements of my property line. But she gave me that condescending smile people like her are famous for and said, "The HOA rules override private interpretations of boundaries." Private interpretations? These weren't interpretations. These were legally recorded documents. Still, she tried to gaslight me like I was the one who didn't understand my own property. I asked her where the vote was. She said there wasn't one. I asked her why I didn't get notified. She said it wasn't necessary. I asked her how she thought she could override legal documents. She said I could take it up with the board.
except the board was her friends, her puppets, people who nodded along with everything she said because they were too afraid or too uninterested to challenge her. When someone tries to steal from you, you feel 3 stages of emotion. First, disbelief, because you can't imagine someone being shameless enough to do it. Then, anger. Deep, boiling anger, the kind that makes your hands shake. And then clarity, the cold, sharp moment when you realize, I can fight this, and I will. I left the office without another word. The stakes in my yard stayed there all day like a taunt. Neighbors whispered. Her cousin showed up later, walking around the lakefront like he already owned the place, grinning at me like he had won. But that grin didn't last long. That night, I opened every legal document I owned. I contacted a lawyer friend. I researched HOA regulations, state property laws, private shoreline rights, everything. And I found exactly what I needed. The HOA had no authority whatsoever to redistribute deeded land. They had no authority to modify property boundaries. They couldn't take, assign, or reallocate anything that wasn't common property. And my lakefront, it was legally mine. If they wanted to challenge it, they'd have to take me to court, and they had 0 grounds. I printed every relevant law, every reference, every page. And I didn't just prepare to defend myself. I prepared to make an example out of them. But I wasn't going to start with a lawsuit. No. I wanted something much more visible. Something that would hit Karen right where it hurt. Her ego. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. 1 to a fencing company, 1 to a property surveyor, 1 to my lawyer. By noon, all 3 had arrived. The surveyor walked the entire lakefront, remeasured everything, confirmed the boundaries exactly as my documents described. Then he handed me a stamped official report. And that's when the fencing company got to work. This wasn't just any fence. I designed it intentionally. Tall, clean, beautifully constructed, stained a deep cedar color that stood out boldly against the green of the lawn. It wasn't a fence built out of spite. It was built out of pride and clarity, and the absolute need to show the HOA that if they wanted to pretend they owned my land, I was going to make it painfully obvious that they didn't. The workers drilled deep into the ground, cemented posts aligned every plank with precision. By the time the sun began to set, the structure was impossible to ignore. But the real shock came when Karen walked over and saw what I had done. Her face turned red instantly. She marched toward me with that trademark stomp of self-importance, shouting, "You can't build this! This violates the HOA aesthetic code!" I turned, calm as stone, and handed her a copy of the survey, the deed, and the state law, then pointed to the exact section stating that HOA rules do not override property rights. She tried to argue, she tried to yell, she tried to threaten fines. But with my lawyer standing next to me, she quickly realized her threats meant nothing. He informed her, loud enough for every neighbor to hear, that the HOA attempted to fine me, enter my property, touch the fence, or continue altering boundary lines, we would file a formal complaint and sue the entire board for misconduct, abuse of authority, and attempted property theft. Her mouth literally dropped open. Her cousin, who had been watching from across the yard, looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Neighbors had gathered by then, watching the showdown, and when they realized the HOA had tried to steal private land, shock turned to murmurs. Then murmurs turned to disgust, and disgust turned into support for me. But the best part wasn't even the legal victory. The best part was watching the fence transform the entire dynamic of the neighborhood. Because my fence didn't just block off the lakefront, it exposed the HOA's corruption. It made it physically obvious that they had attempted to take something that wasn't theirs. Within days, several neighbors requested their own property surveys. Some realized the HOA had been bending rules for years. People complained, people pushed back, and eventually the board called an emergency meeting. For the first time in her life, Karen didn't walk in confidently. She walked in pale, nervous, and noticeably quieter. Residents demanded explanations. They demanded transparency. They demanded accountability. And by the end of the night, the board, under pressure, voted to remove her as president. Her cousin quietly backed out of buying the house. The stakes in my yard were removed, the accusations disappeared, and suddenly the HOA was very, very respectful. As for the fence, it stayed, not out of spite, but as a reminder that homeowners have rights, a reminder that entitlement has limits, and a reminder that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, they cannot take what you've earned, what you've worked for, and what legally belongs to you. But here's the part most people don't know. After everything's settled, several neighbors approached me. They thanked me, not because of the fence, but because I stood up against someone who had been bullying the entire community for years. One older couple even said, "You didn't just protect your lakefront, you freed all of us." And that hit me hard. Sometimes your fight isn't just yours. Sometimes standing up for yourself gives other people courage too. So, if there's one thing you take from this story, let it be this. Never let someone, HOA, neighbor, or anyone, intimidate you into believing you don't have the right to your own property. Policies aren't laws. Authority isn't ownership. And entitlement isn't power. Real power is knowing your rights and defending them. And sometimes, real power is building a fence that everyone remembers.